Hey guys, we've had a couple of messages the last couple of weeks, or the last few months really, from concerned people worrying about what's going on in Japan at the moment in politics and with the government as far as foreigners are concerned, immigration and all that sort of stuff. So obviously, as you guys would be aware, the last 12 months we've seen a bit of a swing in the Japanese politics and Japanese government to a more of a, well, I don't know what you call it. I'm not into politics myself, but I guess you'd call it a right-wing sort of swing or a nationalist sort of swing or something. But the result of whatever it is that foreigners and immigration have been a topic of discussion. They're talking about other things as well, of course. There's all sorts of other things that they're concerned about. But the one that obviously concerns us and our viewers tends to be the foreigners one and the immigration one. So we've seen all sorts of things, and what's been happening has been that either Takaichi, the Prime Minister, or one of her people, one of her party members, or another person in government, or opposition people, like the San Sato group, which are the sort of probably the most one of the most extreme nationalist groups in Japan. And what will happen is one of these characters, or some of these characters, will suggest something. They'll say that they're considering something, or that they want something to happen, and then it'll blow up. So for an example, the San Sato leader, who comes out with all sorts of stuff, he's the one, he wants to cap the amount of foreigners that are allowed into Japan. I think he said 5% most recently was the figure he came up with. That should be the maximum allowed in, and that if we have 5% of the population's foreign, then we shouldn't allow any more in. That should be it. Close the door. The other thing that he said recently was that he thinks that foreigners should have to go home and leave Japan and go back to their home country when they reach retirement age, right? When they can't work anymore. So 65 or whenever it is that people retire in their particular field. So in other words, what he's suggesting is that we should come here and work hard for 30 or 40 years and build lives here and live here for 30, 40 years, make this our home for 30, 40 years, and pay our taxes and our health insurance and our pension and all our social responsibilities, and then as soon as we're not able to work anymore, we should have to leave and go back to our own country that we haven't lived in for 30 or 40 years. That's his suggestion, right? So there's all sorts of stuff like this that comes up, right, that's being discussed. But what's happening is these things aren't rules yet, right? There hasn't actually been any new rules that are particularly radical or particularly going to concern anybody. So all it is lots of discussion, and that's the way stuff like this works in Japan. Is usually there's lots and lots of talking, and then nothing happens, right? That's usually the way things happen, or some sort of more moderate version of what they've been talking about will eventually happen. But unfortunately, what's been happening is the clickbaiters and attention seekers, those people that are desperate for clicks and to get attention from people, take these things that are mentioned in passing and run with them. And they'll get a couple of images off the internet of the Prime Minister and somebody else, and they'll post the story. So a couple of examples of that is, one was the government's been talking about changing the requirements for a business manager visa. So until now, if you had some sort of business that you could start in Japan, providing you fulfilled all the requirements, you could come here and start up a business in Japan and employ some people and do your thing. And what they're talking about is adding a requirement to that the person that comes to Japan to start a business should have 30 million yen in capital, which is about $200,000, right? And as for that right or wrong or fairness or unfairness of these things, it's not really, I don't really care. It's not really relevant what I think it's fair or not fair or right or wrong. You guys can debate that if you want to, but I'm just trying to tell you what I'm seeing and hearing. So that's what they've proposed, is that they make this 30 million yen requirement. And then the clickbaiters got onto it and ran the story I'll put it up on the screen if I think of it, that Indian and Nepalese restaurants, I've written some stuff down here, Indian and the stricter visa rules will force the Indian and Nepalese restaurants to close. Right? There's no one's mentioned Indian or Nepalese visas. I don't know who picked up on that, but then what happened is some clickbaiters posted that, and then some other clickbaiters picked up on it, and they posted their own clickbait on it. So here's another one. Thousands of popular local Indian curry restaurants will be forced to close because of these new rules, right? Which, it's a real stretch. They're taking these suggestions or discussions that aren't rules yet, they're just discussions. And so why they picked Indian restaurants? I mean, there's all sorts of foreign-owned businesses in Japan. Obviously, they think Indian restaurants are important or something, but it's a real stretch, because obviously any new rules that they're going to bring in are going to apply to people who will be coming in from the time the rule is implemented, right? And I mean, they could apply if they brought in that new requirement for the 30 million yen requirement. They could bring that in when one of those business owners, one of those Indian restaurant business owners, for example, goes to renew their visa. They could say, where's your 30 million yen? They could, but it's pretty unlikely, isn't it? I mean, if we look at these things logically, when they've already got the business operating here, the 30 million yen's to make sure that they can get a business up and running, right? So if they've already got the business up and running, it's sort of irrational to suggest that they're going to then demand the 30 million yen, right? It's just silly. But unfortunately, with this clickbaity stuff, what happens is people just fall for it, and then sadly it really concerns people, because a lot of other people that are in Japan suddenly start to worry about their status, and that's what the emails I've been getting. People that are worried what's going to happen to us, what's going to happen to us. So, what's going to happen to the Indian restaurants. The other one was recently they were talking about, and I've talked about this quite a lot, compulsory lessons for foreigners in Japan, right? So if you want to come here and work on some sort of long-term visa, or if you want to get permanent residency, or if you want to get some sort of permanent status or more permanent status, that you should have to have lessons. And they've talked about all sorts of different lessons. They're talking about Japanese language lessons. They're talking about cultural lessons, which is an interesting one. And it's interesting too, there are Japanese people here who can see our point of view. They can see our point of view. There are some compassionate Japanese people here who do take the other side when these people are making these suggestions about what sort of rules they should bring in. There are people who will stand up for the foreigners. There's anti-foreigner protests happening usually in the big cities, so Tokyo and Osaka and Nagoya. They'll have these anti-foreigner protesters, foreigners go home. But there's always been pro-foreigner protests as well. So, equal rights for foreigners and all this sort of stuff. So there's people arguing both sides of the coin. So this one about the lessons one, lessons in cultural things, someone stepped up, someone in public eye said that's sort of risky then, that you're sort of demanding that, we program the foreigners to behave like Japanese people, which is what obviously those nationalist people want, right? They want the foreigners to come here and be Japanese, basically. They don't want the foreigners to come here at all, actually, but their attitude is if there's going to be foreigners here, they should have to be Japanese. So again, there'll be people who argue both sides of that. We always recommend people behave as Japanese as possible when they're here, but they're not going to be Japanese, are they? So that was that one. What was the other one? We had a couple others as well. And then what's happened is, because of all these discussions, what happens, and you guys might have seen it in other countries, and we've seen it in history as well, where when you get these discussions about the foreigners, that tends to stir up the bigots and the racists, right? So it gives them a voice, and they feel as if, it's okay, oh, we're talking about the foreigners, oh, okay, then I want to talk about the foreigners too, and they'll come out with their bigoted, racist stuff, right? And so the clickbaiters and the attention seekers sort of take advantage of that. So they love those, you know, those restaurants that we talked about before that have the no foreigners sign on the door, right? Which are a real minority, right? But the clickbaiters love that sort of stuff because they know that it gets lots of attention. And so there was one that ran this story that a ramen shop in Osaka secretly charged the foreigners more than they charged the Japanese people. Okay, now that's actually been happening forever in Japan. There are some businesses in Japan that will charge foreigners more for something than they charge the local people, right? And again, as we talked about before, I mean, it's up to you how you react to that. The way I'd react to that is not go to that shop again, right? Because, you know, that's what they're doing. But that clickbaiter, that attention seeker, posted this image that shows that is a ticket vending machine. Now, there are a lot of businesses, a lot of restaurants in Japan that have these ticket vending machines. And what it means is instead of having a cash register that they have to have a staff member at taking your order, you go up to the ticket vending machine and you buy your ticket, and then you take your ticket over to the counter and give it to the kitchen staff, and they get your food and give it to you. So it takes that one step out of the staff, one staff member's not needed. But what that means is that you can't charge two different prices to foreigners and Japanese people because it's a ticket machine, right? So the clickbaiter, attention seeker that posted that nonsense either has never been to Japan or doesn't know what that thing is. Because if they knew what that thing is, they'd know that it makes their whole story total BS, because, you know, those ticket machines, you go up and you push on the button and it gives you a ticket and you pay the money. You can't discriminate. It's a machine. It can't discriminate, right? So that's BS. And so that's what we're seeing happening, guys. Is that obviously these discussions can make some of us nervous. Some of us non-Japanese people nervous, because, you know, any talk about anything that's going to make our lives here difficult is a bit of a worry. But we have to be logical in the way we think about it. Obviously, the messages I've been getting from people have been people that are already here. Now, if you've lived here like for a couple of decades, it's pretty unlikely that they're suddenly going to say to you, you have to go and do a Japanese lesson, right? Or that you have to go and do a lesson on Japanese culture. Any of these things that they do eventually bring in is going to be for people coming, applying for new visas, right? So, and then it's more likely it's going to be, the reality will be, and we've seen this in Japan before, where they have all these sort of extreme ideas, and then the final idea that gets put into action ends up being more sort of middle of the road and more reasonable. I've had a couple of Japanese people mention recently that's what they reckon Takaichi's doing, is that Prime Minister, before she was elected, she had some sort of fairly sort of radical ideas, but since she's become Prime Minister, she's toned it down, because she's realised that the reality is that a lot of the stuff she was talking about wasn't sort of practical. And that tends to be the way Japanese politics works, is they tend to have all this talk going on, particularly like the nutters like the Senseido guys and all those guys have all sorts of crazy talk going on, and, you know, they're not in the government, those guys, so the end result ends up being nothing like that. So to clarify, I think I've got all my points, but to clarify, I think the first point I'd make to those people that have been sending the emails that are all worried, I think if you're already here and you've been here a couple of decades, or you've been here for a period of time, and I would suggest that none of these new rules are going to really apply to us. You know, that Senseido guy with his, you know, we have to leave when we get retirement age, I can't see that coming in. I really can't. I mean, if you want to, you know, if you're a sort of person who's going to worry no matter what, well, you know, you can worry about that, but it just seems very unlikely that they're going to get that even consider that. That was the Senseido guy. That wasn't the government. That wasn't the Prime Minister. That was the Senseido nutter, right? And he comes up with all sorts of nutty stuff. So I'd totally ignore that. And then as for any new rules that come in, they're really more likely to apply for people coming on new visas, rather than people who are already here. And then as for you guys that are planning on coming, we know there's a whole bunch of people watch our videos who are planning on coming here. you know, the end result, the end rules that they eventually will come up with are likely to be pretty moderate compared with some of the radical stuff you're seeing. Don't believe any of that clickbaity nonsense. Don't believe any of that. Any of that nonsense on social media is just rubbish. You know, it's not. They take these little quotes and then twist them. You know, if you own an Indian restaurant in Japan, I'll bet you any money that you're not going to have a problem, right? Or any other sort of business in Japan. If you're already running your business and you're paying your bills and you're paying your tax, that I think those points that keep coming up, and again, I mean, not up to me to say what's fair and what's not, but it does seem pretty reasonable that they expect that everybody pays their taxes and their health insurance and their pension. And I think if you own a business or you're working in Japan and you're paying your tax and your pension and your health insurance like you're supposed to, I don't think they're going to give us any problem at all. You know, if you're planning on coming to Japan and you're planning on applying for a visa, you know, just go through all the steps that they want you to go through, and I'm sure you'll be fine. And if they do expect you to do something, I just thought now that making you do a class. Some of you might remember there was a plane crash here last year where a plane was landing, another plane taxied onto the runway, and there was an accident and a couple of people died and a big fireball, and the people in the passenger aircraft were only saved by the staff doing a great job. And in typical Japanese government reaction to that, I mean, it was a mistake. It was a mistake by a pilot and probably by the air traffic controller as well. But their result, oh, here we go, traffic accident in the middle of nowhere. Well done, fellas. The result, oh, a good one too. The reaction from the government to that accident was to demand that all pilots do a 3-hour training course on how to navigate, how to move around an airport in an aircraft, right? Which all pilots know already. You know, it wasn't that those pilots didn't know that stuff, it's just that they made a mistake. And the air traffic controller missed it, and that was the result. So making all the pilots do 3 hours of training isn't going to change anything, right? But we did it, and I did it. And so my point is that if they do bring any sort of rule like that you've got to go and do some course or you've got to go and do something, then we'll just do it, won't we? Or you will. I'm sorry, I probably won't have to. But you know, if you have to do that, if you have to go and do a course, you know, 3-hour course or something on Japanese culture, then you do it. But I just can't see it happening. I really can't. I think the stuff that will happen, they will get tighter on the people that are here already paying the taxes and the health insurance and the pension, and then people coming in, I think they're going to just raise their standards back to where it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you really had to be able to give some benefit to Japan before you could come here. And that's been what the government, if we look at actually what the government has said, not what people have proposed, not what the Sansato nut job has been saying, if we listen to actually what the Prime Minister and her ministers have been saying, the stuff they say hasn't been that radical, you know, and wanting to get back, I think they're wanting to get back to what it was 20 years ago where you had to give some benefit to Japan. So coming here and working for 12 months as an English teacher gave some benefit to Japan. Or coming here as an engineer with some sort of special engineering skills gave some benefit to Japan. So that's what it used to be 20 years ago. And what's happened is they've slowly lightened up on it so that people have been coming here and getting a visa to come here and, you know, drive trucks or to come here and do some job that probably Japanese people could do anyway. And I think that's the stuff they want to cut out. The Prime Minister did actually say that she doesn't think Japan needs to bring unskilled workers to Japan. That was what she actually said. And so, again, not my place to say what's fair and what's not, but it probably does sound reasonable that if you're not going to bring some benefit to the country, then they don't want to let you in, which is sort of could be said to be quite a reasonable expectation, you know. So if you have some skill, I mean, the old days, 20 years ago, that's what you had to do if you wanted to come to Japan. Is you had to get on their website and you look at their requirements. The other thing is too, guys, if you're thinking about coming soon, apply soon, because if you get on their website, whatever country you're in, you get on the website for the Japanese embassy and look at their requirements, visa requirements, they'll still be what they were last year. They haven't changed, and so I'd recommend applying. If you're thinking about coming, apply soon, but have a look at, or on the immigration department's website, they have pages in English there of all the different visa requirements, what you need to get a visa, and you know, it's not that difficult for depending on what your background is and what your skills are. So it's not going to change that much. It's not going to change that much, I would not think. So, but either way, we no point in worrying or panicking until we see anything happen that requires worrying or panicking, you know, because all this nonsense that we're seeing on social media is just rubbish. Just ignore all that. Ignore all that stuff. Don't let it worry you. I've had people really, really upset and really worried, sending emails, oh, what do you think? What do you think? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? So, you know, if you're here already, just pay your taxes, pay your health insurance, pay your pension, make sure you do that, and you should be fine, you know. They're not going to do it. They're not going to suddenly make the Indian restaurants close, you know. They're not that crazy. Not that crazy. So anyway, yeah, that'll be my observations. There'll always be, with all these, any sort of topic we make, any video we make on any topic, you always get both extremes, and usually both extremes think that whatever I've said is no good. The ones that are already panicking will think that I'm not panicking enough, and the ones that aren't worried at all will think I'm panicking too much. That's usually what happens when I make videos like this. But my suggestion is that if you're a foreigner in Japan, don't panic. Don't panic. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure it's not going to be as radical as it might sound like it's going to be. I'm sure it'll be fine. We'll see, won't we? Time will tell. More videos coming soon.